Hey guys, welcome to the second episode of the Vanguard Podcast. I'm Zach.
I'm Gavin.
For today's episode, we talked to Cori Bush, who you might remember from the documentary Knock Down the House, which documented her 2018 congressional run along with a few other insurgent candidates. She's running again for Missouri's 1st Congressional District, and she sat down with us to talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected her and her community in St. Louis, as well as the ideas that she has to address some of the problems that are plaguing this country if she's elected to Congress.
Later in the podcast, we're joined by attorney Brent Welder, who ran for Kansas's 3rd Congressional District in 2018, garnering the support of progressive leaders like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now him and his wife, Christy, are representing a Missouri family in a potentially landmark legal case concerning workers' rights in the time of coronavirus.
Awesome. Check it out.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. We're so excited to talk with you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
How have you been feeling? We were just speaking before with some members of your team about how you'd been feeling ill recently.
Oh, yeah. I've been ill a long time. So it's just, you have, some days are really, really bad. Then you feel decent and think that you're getting better, and then it hits you all over again. It's been unbelievable since March.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. We certainly hope you feel better soon.
Thank you.
Welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today to talk.
We wanted to talk to you. You sort of cut your teeth in politics in 2016. You ran for Senate and then again for Congress in Missouri's 1st District in 2018 as a Justice Democrat. We just wanted to start off by asking you, what alternative does your candidacy provide that is not that the incumbent Representative William Lacey Clay, who's been in office for almost 2 decades, does not?
A lot of things. First of all, I would say that one is I would be a present congressperson, someone who is approachable, someone who is accessible. And because that's who I am, period. And as a registered nurse, as an activist, it just comes with that. As a pastor, even though I'm not pastoring anymore, it's that same heart. And so that's one thing. People feeling represented is it should be part of the job. And so one thing that I've been able to do, just in my activism, is help build coalitions, and I am a part of a huge coalition of people. St. Louis has always been such a segregated community, and during Ferguson is when everything started to change, and now we have been able to carry that on. And so I have good working relationship with our Latinx community, our Asian American Pacific Islanders community, our LGBT community, and our Muslim community. So many different groups in our community that where we weren't before, we are now. And that's something that I want to push forward and continue to help people to feel represented. Another thing is I don't accept corporate PAC money, not a dollar. And it's not that none has been offered. So I want to make that clear. People think that, they're not giving you any. No, that's not the case. It's that we don't accept any, and we don't accept any because I'm someone who always felt that I didn't have a voice next to these big corporations that are giving the big dollars, or these, big time lawyers or whoever they are that can afford to give thousands of dollars to a candidate. I'm someone that could barely give anything. And so I want that person to feel represented. And so I don't want to go in with anybody having a hold on me. No, I want to be able to represent the people straight up. So that's another thing. The other thing is I'm not going to be someone, and I have never been this person, someone who will say I support something. I'm not going to just support something. I'm not going to just sign the dotted line. I'm going to go and fight for it if it's what my community needs and it's not happening. So I'll get on MSNBC. I'll get on CNN. I'll get on this talk show and this podcast. I'm getting on this and that, wherever they'll allow me to go and to talk about our community and what we need. I'm not going to throw breadcrumbs out and hope to have your loyalty. None of that. You won't see me disappear until it's time to, unless, when somebody's running against me, or if it's time to run again, I won't disappear. I'm going to still be there with the people, and I'm bringing this community together.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks so much. And when it comes to your community, St. Louis, Zach and I here are from Kansas City, and it seems as soon St. Louis in particular has been hit really hard by the pandemic, the COVID, and Missouri. As a nurse and a community activist, what are your feelings on the nation's response to the pandemic on a federal level, but also Missouri Governor Mike Parson's decision to reopen so soon, Missouri for business, and particularly what's going on in St. Louis?
Yeah, it's disturbing. I don't believe we had the proper response from the beginning. I believe that so there are professionals, there are experts in different fields, and I think that we need to listen to the people that have expertise. As a registered nurse, don't ask me about how to be an accountant. I'd rather the accountants handle that thing, but then I don't want the accountant, doing the medical thing that I was trained for. So in the same way, I feel like that's where we missed it. We didn't allow that to happen early on, and then we have a president who decided, who didn't jump when he needed to jump, and so the rest of us are living through that mistake that he made. And as a nurse, we're already dealing with, in the St. Louis area, already dealing with these huge health disparities, especially in my district, which is predominantly a predominantly Black district. It is still there were issues pre-COVID. And so now adding COVID-19 to it, what are we seeing? Of course, we're seeing more Black people are the ones who are burdened with this illness, and also who are the ones dying. So we Black women have the most cases, and then just Black people, period. But Black men, maybe by a couple, are the ones that are dying. And so, as a nurse, it hurts my soul, because we have people who have been needing healthcare, wanting healthcare, proper healthcare for so long, and then to add this, I think is despicable. And I think our governor, I think that it has to be people over property and people over business and all of that, and that's not the way he's seeing things right now. I'm not ignorant to the fact, though, that some areas of Missouri don't have the high numbers like we do, and so I can understand that. But I think that our governor should be somebody that governs the people, and that's not what I feel like he's been doing.
I want to ask you about the congressional response so far. They passed the CARES Act through Congress and the Senate, which obviously gave everybody the $1,200 stimulus check, but it also provided, trillions of dollars in stimulus money to Wall Street, as well as the recent proposal from the House of the HEROES Act, which passed unanimously, I believe, except with the exception of Pramila Jayapal. You mentioned earlier not being able to be sold on tough votes. I think that both of those cases, multiple people in Congress would describe them as tough votes. Could we just get some insight into your position on those bills? Would you have supported them, and whether you thought they were good legislation?
So I would say that the way that I look at it is, I don't know that things would be the same. I feel like, I just don't know where everybody was and what everybody was doing at that time to allow things to get to where they ended up. Did the people need some money? Yes. Did businesses need some money? Yes. Did hospitals and healthcare systems need money? Yes. Did we need more testing? Yes. But did we need $1,200? No. That didn't solve anybody's problems. And that here we are throwing crumbs again at people. We need what I know Representative Omar has been talking, what her work on making sure that people have the money to be able to pay their rent and their mortgage, and helping homeowners, helping landowners. That work that she's doing, what Representative Tlaib has been doing, saying $2,000 a month is what we need, and I think for her it's going for a year. So I would be the one supporting those and supporting that loudly. I think also sometimes it's like I understand I'm not there, but I do understand that when you have people that are advocating for something that are willing to go the extra mile for it, I think that would have made a change. When we talk about the HEROES Act, would I have supported it? Probably so, because right now that's what we have, and it's been that's what we have. The CARES Act, actually with both of them, they're problematic because the money that's going to Wall Street and I honestly, I feel like I would have done something different on the other side of it, to where we wouldn't have gotten there, to where we would have had to vote on it.
Thanks. Another question that I wanted to ask you in light of the kind of the recent tragedy in Minneapolis, the murder of George Floyd, and as an organizer from Ferguson, you were very involved following the shooting of Michael Brown. You've recently called for all congressional candidates to sign a pledge to end police violence. I just wonder if you could talk about some of the things that both citizens can do to effectively speak up against police brutality, and what mechanisms you hope to bring through your role at a federal level so that we can stop the over-policing and the criminalizing of our communities, as particularly our communities of color.
Yeah, I think that we are in a place where, so first of all, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted by it. I am oftentimes triggered by these things that continue to happen. And I have to say that we have to get past this point of, it's always like, okay, so what are they going to do? What's going to be next? Are there going to be protests? Are there going to be this or that? People are looking to see that instead of figuring out and organizing what they can do so that we won't get here. Because as I've been watching the protest there, as triggered as I am by it, and the tear gas and all of that, but as I'm watching it, I'm thinking, this is happening, but then there may be somebody tomorrow. We were just talking, we've been talking about Breonna Taylor. We've been talking about Ahmaud Arbery, but then here came George Floyd, and so we have to do some other things. And I think one thing that has to happen in this country is we need our white community to stand up and do something different. There are groups like the Anti-Racist Collective. There's a group, Witnessing Whiteness, here locally. There are so many groups that are doing great work, but what we need is, because the thing is, I can't teach your child not to grow up racist. I can't do that. That's something that you have to do, because in 10 or 15 years, who will we have? Will we continue to have this happening, or will our white community talk to their own children and across the board to say, to teach them what racism is and to teach them what anti-racism is, and we got to get out of this la-la land of I don't see color. That hurts so many communities when we don't see color. I need you to see my color because I need you to see what happens to us. So I think that right now, I think that that's the place that we're in. As a Black community, we can say what we can, do this all day long and, and be, enraged and all of that. But nothing happens if so many of the people that have the power aren't willing to make a move. And I feel like right now in Congress, we need some more folks that's going to stand up for Black lives, that'll stand up just like I stand up for my Palestinian friends, even though that's against a lot of folks in Congress, even the incumbent right now, I stand up for BDS, and I stand up for it because I feel like, how dare you discriminate against them? How can I sit back and allow you to discriminate against the whole people when I'm fighting to make sure that me and my family aren't discriminated against? So I think that that's a place where we are right now, is I would love to see a change in what's happening with our white community. And a friend of mine, we were talking this morning, and it's going to look more like what Truth and Reconciliation is coming out of the white community.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Another question I had for you is, as a Justice Democrat, and the original Justice Democrat actually, what are your feelings on the state of the progressive left in America right now, especially following the implosion of Bernie Sanders' campaign, who you were a surrogate for, and now that we're stuck with Joe Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee, someone who's routinely been dismissive of policy proposals like Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, and who's kind of the architect of a lot of the problems that we're living with right now.
Publicly just recently came out as anti-BDS, which you just mentioned.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, so the one thing is, of course, progressives aren't a monolith, just like all other groups, most other groups, I guess. So there are so many different, I guess, levels of progressivism, and so I think that's where we fight. We have this problem because we have some that are like purity tests. point blank. And then we have some that are like, as long as you believe these views, or you believe the majority of the views in your area, then we'll consider you the progressive. Or if you believe one and everything else is conservative, but you have that one in an area that's conservative, you're considered the progressive. So I think that's the battle oftentimes. And so with what happened with Bernie Sanders this time, I mean, it was like, for me, it was like the rug was swept, was yanked from up under me, because I wasn't expecting this to be able to happen again this way. I'm very disappointed in the people that played a part in bringing him down the way that he was brought down. And I'm totally disappointed, and history will remember what you did. You are absolutely on the wrong side of history. Every single person that played a part in that, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or Libertarian or whatever you are, you played a part. History will remember you. But I think that right now what we have to do, because we do have Joe Biden as most likely as the presumptive nominee, now we have to look at what we can do to get him to start to lean our way and start to adopt what we're asking for, because this is the thing. You have to earn our votes. I won't back down from that. You have to earn our vote. It's not enough for me. It's not enough for me to say, well, this person is just not Trump. Because the thing is, people laughed off. Let's remember, people laughed off Trump, what he was doing before he got elected. People laughed it off. He was mocking disabled people. People, oh no, it's not a big deal. He was making all of these gaffes. He was talking about every group of people of color. He was talking about, in derogatory ways and in white supremacist ways. With this superiority complex. And nobody called him on it. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. So how do we just allow somebody else to walk in and say, well, he's not that person? No, he has to earn our votes. So I won't back away from that. I think that all Democrats need to look at that and call him to the carpet. That makes him a better person. Just like people won't allow me to just win the race. They want to hear what I stand for, who I am, and all of that. I got to work for mine. So as president, he has to work for his. I've said this before, he's not running for president of the car wash committee. Earn it.
Yeah, just to kind of expand on that, Joe Biden seems to be rather dismissive and almost sort of put off by any suggestion that the Black community would want something more than what he's already done. I'm sure you've seen the clip from the Breakfast Club where, he kind of challenges Charlemagne and is like, you ain't Black if you aren't already sure that, you're going to fall in line and vote for me. He's referred to the Black vote as his firewall throughout the campaign. I just wondered what, if you were, in Joe Biden's ear, what would you be telling him that he needs to do differently in order to actually build connections with this community that he claims to be speaking for at all these times, but seems to really have a disconnect between reality and what he perceives?
Yeah. Let's remember what happened with Hillary Clinton and her hot sauce in her bag. Let's not so soon forget that if you don't actually reach the communities, if it's not genuine, you may have a particular part of the community that will support you, but if you can't galvanize people to the polls, if you can't excite people to the polls, then I don't see how that thing is going to happen for you. And the other thing is this: you lose me when you tell me when I'm not Black. How dare you ever in your 80 years almost? How can you ever tell me that I'm not Black when there has not been ever one day when you stood up and had to wonder if a police officer was going to murder you simply because they pulled you over? If you've never been targeted in a mall or in a store, if you've never lived that life, don't ever tell me that I'm not Black. Because of my own right to vote for whoever I choose. Let's be clear about that. The right to vote is mine. I can vote for whoever I want, or I can sit it out if I choose to. That is my right. And so for him to say that was absolutely way off. And the other thing I would whisper in his ear is, the number of how many of my friends I remember going away due to that crime bill when I was younger, and those that are still in prison that went to prison for nonviolent offenses that just ended up being in that cycle, or they ended up staying in prison because stuff happened while they were in prison. So they lost their lives. I have friends who have been in jail since we were 16 and 17 when they went to jail, and they've been gone ever since.
While you've certainly expanded your platform since entering politics in 2016 through campaigning and community outreach and really building up the activist community, as well as being featured in Knock Down the House, along with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a few other progressive insurgent candidates. Now, in your second bid, still refusing corporate money, as we talked about before, how do you fight back against the Democratic establishment and the big money that kind of fuels the machine in a time of social distancing, when many of the traditional grassroots strategies have kind of been thwarted by our need to stay socially distanced and prevent the spread of the virus?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is, so initially it was difficult. I had a huge problem with wanting to make phone calls to ask people for, like, how am I going to make these donor calls, when this is hitting everyone? And it was really difficult. But what I had to remember is that on the other side of this, there will be an other side of this, and who should be representing you on the other side as we try to pick up the pieces and we try to build our communities back. The other thing is, we're in the position that we're in right now because things weren't in place, because we have somebody who has been complacent, somebody who's flown, just kind of been able to just glide up under the radar, not only in my district, but in so many other districts. And so in order to not be in this place again, if a natural disaster happens or another pandemic or something happens again, this is what we need. And so I reached out, and so I would, I would call people and I would say the first thing, and I still do, the first thing out of my mouth after I introduce myself is, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, are you connected to the resources that you need for you and your family? Are there any resources, that you're lacking, and can I connect you? So that's the first thing that I ask about, and then I take the call from there. Also, the team immediately started. So I ended up getting sick 14 days to the day after Bernie Sanders had his St. Louis rally here, and I introduced him. 14 days to the day later, I ended up sick. And I, like I said, I've been sick since March 24th. And so my team ended up, they started calling around the district. They started calling our elders first, just checking in. They were just the wellness checks only. And so that's one way that we've also been able to stay connected and to help people to know that we're still here. Once people are back on their feet, they may remember, oh, Cori, that's the one that called me. So then maybe they'll feel like, okay, this is somebody that I can donate to. I will also say the people that are able to donate have been donating, and they've been saying that people have been saying that I'm going to donate because I'm extra, because I can, and I know somebody else can.
Yeah. Well, that's great that you've been reaching out that way and helping your community. Is there anywhere people can go to support you further or to donate?
Absolutely. At coribush.org. It's CORIBUSH.org/donate. Or you can just go to the website and there's a donate button there. I'm the good Bush, so don't get thrown off by the last name.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you so much again for all the work you do. We were so happy to have you today. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good one.
I really appreciate it. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye.
So you're an injury attorney and, like I said, candidate for the 2018 3rd Congressional District of Kansas.
Exactly.
It's great to have you here today on the podcast. We really wanted to talk to you specifically about this legal case that you and your wife and legal partner, Christy, are working on, a case that could set a very important precedent for workers who have contracted the coronavirus. And if successful, the decision on this case could potentially open the doors to other workers suing their employers for failing to adequately protect them from COVID-19, if I understand the case correctly. Could you maybe talk to us about this potentially landmark case and tell us about any new developments of interest?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. There's a woman by the name of Celia Yat-Banago who was a nurse for 40 years with the same kind of hospital system. And not long after the public became, quite aware of the coronavirus epidemic, she was one of the people out front vocalizing the request for nurses to have proper PPE, the N95 masks and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, even though the hospital did have those masks, for various reasons, they denied her request. And not only that, they had her caring for a patient who, was suspected to have had coronavirus and ultimately was confirmed by a test. And because she was caring for that patient, both her and the other nurse that were caring for the patient unfortunately contracted coronavirus. The other nurse was able to pull through. Celia suffered for a month, essentially alone, very, very limited contact with loved ones, and ended up passing away. And, this was a very clear example of, at the very least, somebody that obviously contracted coronavirus at work. And under Missouri law, if you contract a disease at work, it's supposed to be covered by workers' compensation. However, there's been a worry, and even, I think, certain defendants and employers and corporations around the country that have been saying that they're going to be fighting these kind of cases and not paying the kind of claims that they're supposed to under the law. However, here we were able to bring a claim, file it, and we're currently negotiating with the employer. But it really is being watched by everyone as a case to see whether workers are going to get justice under the way the law is.
Yeah. And so the way that we understand it, this would then set a precedent to remove the barriers at the federal level for first responders and healthcare workers. And if I can just kind of jump in right there. So there's a couple things going on. This case in particular, at least in my opinion, is a very clear-cut case where the family really deserves justice unquestionably. It's so obvious that Celia contracted the virus from the actual patient who ultimately tested positive. Celia and the other nurse then after that tested positive. But the family is not just seeking justice in their own right for the death of Celia. They are. It's really important to them to try to make workplaces and, frankly, our country safer for all healthcare workers, and to get justice for all healthcare workers. And right now, the way the law is, if you're a firefighter or a police officer or an EMS worker, and you contract coronavirus in Missouri, there's a presumption under the law that you actually got that at work. That's something that we're doing for these people. They're serving us during very difficult times. And, I think the governor who passed this law thought the least we can do is create that presumption for these people. And that was exactly the right thing to do. Unfortunately, though, in Missouri, there is no presumption for healthcare workers. And obviously, healthcare workers are just as much, if not more, at risk than anyone because they're working at the hospitals where people are actually going. And most states in the country do not have laws with this presumption for any first responders, much less healthcare workers. There are a couple of states, California and Minnesota, that do have the presumption, but almost every other state doesn't. And the family is working very hard to not only, obviously grieve because their mother just passed away just a matter of weeks ago, but also hoping that some silver lining that comes out of this is that we can get some positive, progressive changes in the law that protect workers in this unprecedented time.
Yeah. So you're kind of working in the legal arena to remedy these issues and kind of make some progress for workers' rights. What do you think the response has been from the federal government and from both the Democrat and Republican leadership? Do you think the response has been adequate for workers, or do you think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in that realm as well?
I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. I mean, certainly on this very specific issue that I'm talking about now, we're actually kind of still at the early stages of seeing what we can do. And I've been contacting some people on the Hill that I know that are really effective to see if we can get something done. But in general, it's really tragic that Well, first of all, there's a lot of things that should have been in place before any pandemic occurred, right? Things like Medicare for all, things like fair wages. But it's tragic that when a pandemic does hit, even then, well, first of all, the public is even more supportive of issues like that than ever. But yet the mentality in Washington and the mentality among politicians is just as bad as ever. Here, let's talk about the presidential race for a second. We have clown of the earth, Donald Trump, okay. And then we have Joe Biden, who is the Democratic nominee, who is talking, giving interviews day in and day out from his home, but apparently hasn't stopped to read the polls to see that 60% of the public supports Medicare for all. So we have 60% of the people, the American people, supporting Medicare for all, and then we have both major party nominees in the minority, which is not only bad policy, that's just frankly bad politics, right? Why would you want to be on the wrong side of the vast majority of the American people? So, I mean, there's a lot of directions we could go with that question, and we could be here all day. But that's just one example of, the resistance that we're up against among the establishment to achieve a lot of these things that we need to do.
Yeah. On a more narrow level, specifically looking at the case that you're looking at, we're covering, as you said, our firefighters and police officers and public servants in that capacity who are contracting COVID-19 at work. Has there been resistance in allowing our medical workers, the people that the public by and large has recognized as the heroes of this pandemic, has there been pushback and getting those people covered? It seems to most people, I would imagine, that this is kind of a common sense, do the right thing kind of policy move that needs to be enacted immediately.
So as far as our efforts to change the law, we're in the very early stages. We literally just I started talking to the family about this within the last couple of weeks. But as far as, resistance, what we've seen, is that most states have not implemented this law, and they should have, right? And in Missouri, we have a situation where they've taken some great steps and frankly done a lot better than most states have, but for some unknown reason at this point, they have not extended it to healthcare workers. So I'm not ready to say that there is resistance right now. Now, do I anticipate resistance? Sure, I do. I think it's inconceivable that the governor, when he was trying to decide who to include, hadn't put some thought into including healthcare workers and decided not to. And this is one of the better states in that very specific regard. Most other states haven't changed their law at all, or have changed it but have not included healthcare workers. So, I do see it as a long-term battle, but I also think that this particular case, and the unique nature of the family really wanting to make a difference for the legacy of their mother, can have a really good chance of making some real positive change here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for speaking to us about that. It's a really obviously important case and a really important work you're doing. I wanted to pivot a little bit into talking about your 2018 congressional race, which I was an enthusiastic supporter of. And it kind of seemed to me and a lot of other progressives that you had some momentum on your side. You had a little bit of energy working in your favor. And then it kind of appeared that the establishment, so to speak, through ways of some groups like Emily's List, kind of came into the race and dumped a lot of cash into your primary opponent, Sharice Davis, who ultimately edged you out and went on to win the general election against the incumbent Kevin Yoder. Can you talk about the effect that these kind of seemingly well-intentioned but ultimately kind of corporate groups and PACs like Emily's List, the impact that they have on grassroots-funded candidates such as yourself, and how those organizations kind of use the veneer of progressivism to, I guess you could say, trick voters even into voting for less progressive and kind of more corporate-friendly candidates at the end of the day?
And frankly, I mean, I think I would challenge the presumption that the super PACs are in it, presumably for the right reasons, right? I think everyone knows exactly what they're in it for. They are in it so that extremely, enormously wealthy billionaires, giant corporations can buy off politicians so that, if they win and when they get in, they will rig the laws in the favor of those billionaires and those giant corporations. In my race's case, we were, a poll came out, I think it was a week before the primary election, having me up by 14 points. And between that point and the end of the election, there was hundreds of thousands, I think ultimately 700,000 Maybe it was even, actually, I think it was close to 1 million when you add all the super PACs that were running ads either against me or for my opponent. There was even a group called Ending Spending that was, running ads saying, too liberal for Kansas, this kind of thing.
Go figure, right?
Yeah. And, frankly, I mean, here's what it comes down to. Did I expect all of that to happen? Absolutely. I knew that I was running a campaign that no one had ever tried in this district. I knew that I was challenging the most powerful, the most wealthy power brokers in our country, the organizations, the Wall Street banks, the corporations that are even more powerful than our elected officials because they are the ones that actually own our elected officials. And I absolutely expected them to come at me with full force. And, I am just so proud. I really am just so proud of the campaign that we ran, to the extent that when I started on this campaign, every single person, including my wife, who grew up right here, she said I was well-intentioned but crazy, right? There would be no way that we would have success in this campaign. And instead, we built an enormous campaign. I think we probably broke record for the number of donors to our campaign. We had amazing grassroots energy. Came within just a few points of winning in the primary. And frankly, if it wasn't for the super PACs, the shadowy donors, whoever it may have been, Wall Street banks, coming after me with the super PAC money in a campaign where I was not accepting any corporate PAC money, I think that it absolutely would have been different, and we'd be in Congress right now. I think that it made all the difference.
Just to continue on that thought, much has been made recently in sort of the mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, about how in order to win middle America states like Kansas or Missouri, you kind of have to, it's necessary to kind of cater to the fiscal and cultural sensibilities of the suburban class. And I wonder, as opposed to the more bold progressive ideas that, we've been proposing, and I wonder if that's true in your view, or I feel like in a lot of your experience would kind of indicate the opposite. And now that we find ourselves in the position, like you said, facing two options where we have, Donald Trump, who obviously nobody considers to be a real, a good option, whereas Joe Biden, is opposed to the things like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, was largely responsible for much of the financial trouble we're in through the repealing of Glass-Steagall, the crime problem, all these problems that we're facing now with another establishment candidate. I guess my question for you is, in your view, what's the best path forward for a sort of beaten down progressive movement at this point?
So, I was called by a reporter with the Daily Beast that checks in with me occasionally to get, some progressive perspective on various things. And he was calling me because at the time, Joe Biden's campaign was doing a big push on Republicans for Biden. And they were pushing to get endorsements from, I think even they were thinking they were going to get endorsements from various Republican Congress people or maybe former elected officials, whatever it may be. And I think the reporter thought that I was just going to say, oh, this is so terrible that he's trying to get, that he's trying to roll out Republicans for Biden. But when he called me, what I told him is this. I said, first of all, I don't have any problem with him trying to get every last person to vote for him as possible. He's running for president. I presume he wants to get as many votes as he can possibly get, right? I said, but where I think he's going wrong is he's trying to kowtow to this, wealthy, so-called, moderate Republican, small sector of the Republican Party, the kind of, the people in DC, these few congressmen that he might be able to get support from. I said, but I think he would actually be a lot more successful and get a lot more votes if he actually went after the fiscally populist sector, enormous sector of the Republican Party. And if he would support things like higher wages, like healthcare reform, like Medicare for all, where everybody would get free healthcare, I really, truly think that he would get way, way more Republican votes. And that's actually the better way to get the Republican votes. And the reporter said back to me, he said, so you mean like the kind of Republicans that were supporting Bernie Sanders? And exactly. And frankly, I think very few people even make that case to the reporters. And I almost was getting the sense that I was the first person kind of making that case to the reporter. But as I saw his gears turning and the more he thought about it, he realized, yes, there is a segment of the Republican Party and obviously an enormous segment of independents that were supportive, either actively supporting or really liked Bernie Sanders' policies because he was an economic progressive populist. And that's the direction that Biden should be going. Now, is he going that direction? Not from what I can tell.
Yeah, it almost seems like a lot of what compelled Missouri voters to move away from Claire McCaskill and vote for Josh Hawley, who, in my view is, not necessarily a true populist, but does offer a lot more in terms of fiscal populism than the Republican Party typically does.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm not sure exactly what his stated position was at the time or if he was ever asked, but I was endorsed by Jason Kander, who did enormously well in Missouri in a Senate run. And I know for a fact that when I discussed it with him, he's very supportive of Medicare for all, not to mention other progressive issues as well. So right there is a perfect example. You have kind of one candidate who is just the epitome of old school, don't do too much, don't try to be too bold, don't try to have too much progress, versus somebody who has really good common sense populist ideas. And Kander wasn't, he didn't win, but he came enormously close to defeating an incumbent. And frankly, I'm very grateful for his support, and I'm friends with him. But maybe if he had been even a little bit more progressive, a little bit more populist, you never know, he may have won the election.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that, especially in these times with coronavirus and the pandemic, that austerity is not really the correct strategy to embrace electorally. People are really hurting. And when that comes back to, the policies of Bernie Sanders and what made his candidacy come so close to success twice as it did. And I remember when Senator Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came to a rally with you in Wyandotte County for your congressional run. And I attended that rally and was really moved and inspired by the speakers and the energy in the room and the potential for a real progressive uprising that I saw there. Do you have any thoughts or opinions on the state of the progressive movement in America right now, especially following the unfortunate implosion of Sanders' campaign? And, now that we are stuck with Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee, a position that none of us are really very comfortable in?
Yeah, just to clarify, do you formally endorse Joe Biden's, bid for presidency? Are you fully behind him?
He hasn't asked for my endorsement. And so, if he does, then I'll talk to him about that. I honestly have a lot of stuff going on in my private life with my law firm and that kind of thing. I don't think he's really has even asked for my endorsement, nor the kind of campaign he's running, I'm not sure whether he would want my endorsement or not. But I certainly, I know we need to get Donald Trump out of there, but I also know that the only way the Democratic Party is going to have success is, I believe, by boldly pushing policies that are going to get those voters that voted for Barack Obama and then switch to Donald Trump back into the Democratic Party. And I think it's obvious to me that the number one way to do that is through, populist progressive ideas. So, I've had a lot of time, obviously, to think about this very question, the state of the progressive movement, the strategy moving forward, that kind of thing, since my campaign ended, about a year and a half ago. And, here's one thought that I've had strongly that I just don't hear very many people talk about, or hardly ever. I think a lot of people assume that the strategy, the winning strategy, is to be, move left in the primary and move right in the general. Okay, that's kind of the way traditionally that you hear things talked about. That was not my plan at all in my election. In fact, I'm starting to wonder if maybe a candidate wouldn't be more successful if they moved a little bit right in the Democratic primary and left in the general. And I'll tell you exactly why I say that. Democratic primary voters have been beaten down by establishment talking points and establishment candidates that keep losing and losing and losing and losing. And they've been beaten down so much and told so often that there's no way we can nominate a progressive, or else, there's just no way to win in the general, that I actually feel like, and I think everyone knows, that Democratic primary voters oftentimes vote against their own policy interests, against their own policy beliefs for the candidate that they think is more electable. And what that means is that if they think that you are, too far left, or frankly, if you agree with them too much, then they might be prone to vote against you, which is completely backwards, right?
Yeah,
just vote for the candidate that they thought was best and that had the issues that agreed with them most, I think then we'd be able to get progressives in the general, and we'd be able to prove by staying strong in our progressive ideals that it's very, very popular. But we just never get the chance to do that.
Yeah. With that in mind, what does the future hold for Brent Welder? You said you've been very busy with, your practice in law. You're obviously doing a lot of work representing this family, really valuable work. Do you see another re-entering the electoral arena in your future? Perhaps Jerry Moran is up for re-election in 2024. Another congressional run. Do you have any mind, or have you paid any mind to, kind of running again in the future?
So I've certainly thought about it. I've talked to my wife about it. My wife is a brilliant attorney as well and would make an amazing candidate as well for anything she would put her heart into. We are both. I am, and my wife is very, very passionate about doing whatever it takes to make our country better, to make our world a better place, to affect progressive change. And I don't think this will be the last that you've heard, certainly the Welder name, whether it's mine or my wife's. And we just want to, when you're running as a progressive, there's certain roadblocks, or not really roadblocks, but hurdles that you have to clear. And one of those was, I am not someone who has ever been willing to sell out in my professional life. As an attorney, I have always represented regular people, workers, the good guys. I've never been somebody who is going to go get paid, $500 an hour to represent the corporation against a regular person. Yeah. And so, taking what was effectively a year and a half off of work to run for office just has its own consequences financially, right? And not to mention that I have 3 very young children. I actually have a son that was born even after our campaign, so he's 1.5 years old now. Yeah, thank you. But that being said, I have a political base. I have amazing activists and donors and volunteers and supporters, across Kansas, across the country. And, I certainly don't want to let that go to waste. And I feel responsible to everyone that pitched in, that attended rallies, that made donations, that donated their time, that, got online and shared, information. I feel, responsible to them to not let our portion of the movement die as well. So I really, as soon as we think that, we found the right way to go, we're going to do it.
Cool. And, since I mentioned earlier that we're going to be speaking to candidate Cori Bush, as well as some other congressional candidates coming up in the next couple of days, given your run and potential future runs, do you have any advice for them, given the pitfalls you experienced and some of the institutional disadvantages you faced? Just any words of advice or?
Well, I know Cori Bush, a little bit, and she is extremely impressive. And, I would never offer her any advice other than just be yourself, because she is just absolutely fantastic and charismatic and a leader. I don't know what kind of advice would I give to people. I would just say, stay true to yourself. After my, our election, which was so hard fought for so long, and such a close election and difficult, outcome. I remember I started getting calls from a few people, but one person I got a call from was Jeff Weaver, who was Bernie's campaign manager in 2016 and senior advisor in 2020. And, I remember it so distinctly. He said 3 words: don't sell out. Don't sell out. And I didn't think he meant that he was worried that I was specifically the type of person that would sell out. But I think he was worried in general that, because it's running as a progressive and being a part of the progressive movement, you don't do it because it's the easiest way to go about having a political career or, getting elected to something. You do it because it's the right way to do it. And, Bernie is a perfect example. He has always stood for the same things, for the right things. And, just did it by sheer hard work, going to every single little pancake breakfast, barbecue, whatever it might be, for years and years and years and decades, and starting low and working his way up. And he never did it. He never sold out. He did it the right way, and he grew to be what I consider to be the greatest political influencer of probably my entire lifetime.
Agreed.
Even though he didn't win, the presidential race. I mean, just think of how much he has shifted the debate and the political dynamic just by, daring to run against the Clinton machine in 2016.
And he showed that the grassroots funding path was a completely possible route, and I mean, equally as profitable for his campaign as those that were raising the big money. So I think, yeah, you're totally right in that he showed the path for so many of these candidates that we're talking to on the show. I think we're very clearly inspired by that very model he laid out. So
yeah, we want to thank you for your time today, and we really look forward to seeing the more work that you do, and we really appreciate the impact that you've had in the Kansas City community.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Thanks.
All
for
right, bye. Yep.
Appreciate it.